is very important. I always use the analogy, if you're driving and someone cuts you off, it's very easy to start swearing and gesturing and whatever the heck you want to do about that person. And then you turn and you realize it's someone you know. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, what's that person going through? Oh, I'm worried about them, or I feel bad, or maybe you don't, maybe you're still swearing at them, but you do think it in a different way. If you know who they are, let's say their mom just died and they've cut you off, you will feel very differently than if it's someone you don't know anything about.
Welcome to the Global Affair podcast, brought to you by Love Out Loud, the world's largest love-based movement, actualizing a civilization of love by 2030. My name's Nicole Gibson, and join me and some of the world's brightest minds as we bring some of the most important and controversial conversations of our time into a space of unity. It's important to know that as your host, this isn't about my personal opinion or bias, but rather an opportunity to listen with love, honesty, curiosity, and reveal the true universal experience us humans have amongst the differences. So if you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well. And with that, let's get it. Dr. Amanda Brisebois, welcome to the Global Affair. We love having not only experts in health, but experts in health that care about other experts in health. I think we're going to have a really dynamic conversation today, and I'd love it for you to just give a bit of context to our listeners. If you were to summarize your mission, how would that go? Your overall mission in the world?
My whole thing right now is to bring people together rather than creating the fractures that we're seeing across the world. And what that takes is being able to talk to each other, accept each other's differences, and actually having skill to do that. And that's really the whole thing that I've been focusing on. And if even I get a 10% or 20% piece of that, I'll be thrilled.
Amazing. We obviously have such aligned missions in this way. And I think most of us have realized over the past 3-4 years, since the pandemic in particular, the level of polarization around certain conversations has exacerbated so much. And we were having a chat before the interview, and you were sort of highlighting, well, some of these problems, a lot of these problems were actually there already. It's just that we got to have, a bit of a magnifying glass put over some of these challenges. And from your experience, what creates this sense of polarization and this impulse for, people who are wanting to be a part or are a part of these conversations to kind of bury their head in the sand or block their ears or sort of demand that they're right and not listen to people that have a difference of opinion?
I wish I knew, the whole truth of where it comes from. I think we all, as people, like to believe that we're pretty smart and that our ideas are really good. I think that's a natural tendency. I think during the pandemic, when we got locked down and told what to do for a lot of time, we started to lose that ability that our opinions really matter. And I think that really impacted people. So all of a sudden we're like, well, it doesn't really matter what I think because I can't do that anyway. I'm not going to have that opportunity. So we started moving backwards from this. We really want to be able to listen to each other. And the more you disagree with me, the better. We'll have a conversation. I'll respect your opinion. You can respect my opinion. And in fact, if we don't agree, that's fine. We actually may come up to a conclusion that's different, but better at the end of the day. So we've started really moving away from that ability to see each other and hear each other and accept that all of those things are good. And then I truly believe, and we've shown this with actually habit forming, that once you start doing something over and over, our nerves and our brains start creating pathways. And so I really believe that the more we think, well, I'm right, or this happened this way, or they did that, and they're terrible people, we can start to create this narrative that's true when really it's probably not. And we get caught in this. In the coaching world, we call it the self-narrative, that it goes into this vortex of what my narrative is, and that's real, and we start to believe it's real, instead of really opening up and thinking about what other people think. And we had a lot of time during the pandemic to sit in our homes to think about what we believe and less time to really reach out and hear what other people thought. We could watch what they thought. So you'd sit there and you'd look at all these unregulated social media or different places people post. You didn't have a chance to ask them about something they post. You just read it as if it was true. And so now all of a sudden, I think we get siloed into, oh, here's this truth and here's that truth. And they're not actually open to hearing what I say because it's not that forum to do so. We've gotten away from that sitting around the table and just saying, hey, you don't agree with me? Cool. I want to hear what that is. And maybe you don't like this and maybe I don't like that, but it's all excellent idea. And how do you move forward? So I think the pandemic has just emphasized this. And before we might have not liked it, but we would at least be able to talk to each other. And we might have had a little kerfuffle or maybe disagreed and maybe be irritated with each other for a little bit. But at least then we could come back together and talk about it. And so I think that's partly why it's been so heightened.
It's such a misconception that unity is all believing the same thing, right? And I think that that's one of the paradoxes that we're kind of living through right now, that, truly unity is the ability to embrace difference, right? And have a high level of tolerance or, God forbid, even maybe acceptance of people that have different beliefs and live different ways and see things, from a different perspective than us. And I've given this a lot of consideration over the past few years. And one of my kind of conclusions is that the world has become very complex, not only the impacts of the pandemic and the radical change that so many people's lives kind of went through individually, societally, and ultimately collectively over this time, but also, the level of consumption, how much our amygdala has to deal with every single day. That's kind of been a rising, challenge over the past 10, 20 years. And it's almost like a defense mechanism to want to oversimplify the world, because to really be with the nuance, the subtleties, the differences actually takes a considerable amount of effort. You need to want to be present and work through things that feel contradictory, move through the discomfort of actually opening yourself to new ideas and new beliefs. And I just wonder, and I'm curious of your perspective on this, is this a sort of a collective defense mechanism to just cope with how complex the world's become and simplify it?
I'll speak through the ears and eyes of my adult sons. I have 3 adult young, in their 20s, and they're always telling me, look what I had to wake up to this morning. I saw this horrific thing on YouTube and I have to start my day like that. And how am I supposed to now live? And how am I supposed to have hope and think about what the future holds? And I think having all of these different forums that we can watch, and we're so connected compared to when I was a kid, we didn't have anything. We didn't have phones. We had no way to see what was happening all over the world. And I think seeing some of those things can be pretty damaging to us. I'm a very sensitive person. I'll watch the news and be depressed about it and think, how can I do different? And maybe I don't have that much impact, which I think is very hard for people when they see these things. When you watch something on TV news or you see something across the world, it's easy to think I'm just one person in this huge, massive world. How do I make a difference? And I think that does degrade in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you talk about all these things that you really need, the very pinnacle at the top is what we call self-actualization. So the ability to do things and be able to create something through ourselves. And I think we're starting to feel that we're not as able to, because there's so many positions and power. There's a lot of powerful people in the world that I think it's easy to see, well, you have no power, because I'm not one of those people. But I'm one to say that we all have power. We all have influence. My son, through the pandemic, taught me that a lot. I was a medical director of a hospital, and sometimes I'd come home and say, there's nothing I can do. And they look at me and go, what are you talking about? I think one of them said, get over yourself. There is something you can do. And I do think each one of us, if we can just step back a little bit and think, what about who I am will make a difference? There's a thing called the 15%. And what is the 15% you can do today? It's just a little bit different than what you might do normally. And maybe it's someone says something that doesn't sit well with you. Instead of walking away, I mean, actually just turn to them and say, hey, tell me what's happening. And it's amazing what happens when you turn your conversations around like that. And all of a sudden instead of feeling you have to always be rowing in the same direction in the boat in order to function well in life, you realize that you can all be rowing in different directions. And you understand each other so much better that at the end, you're going to realize how you row together, and you're going to be that much faster and more efficient. So yeah, little things like that, I think, can give us power instead of having our power taken away from all these other.
I think that's a really interesting point, the idea of how our personal power really plays a role in our ability to, I guess, not be threatened by others around us and be secure in ourselves, which I think lends itself naturally to a more open state, nothing to defend, self-security and feeling like we don't need to take power from the outside. But I'm curious, you've had a long kind of medical journey, and then through your medical journey, you also have become a coach and a coach to other medical professionals. I'd love for you to just give a bit of a history, and then I really want us to get into how do we really put some of these ideas around conflict resolution into practice in our own lives, and for any medical professionals listening to the show, how do they put that in their practice?
It's an interesting journey because I'm quite an introverted person, and I never really was one to be really vocal. When I started practice, I'd sort of sit in the back of the room, and the people, everyone's teams have one or two that are just the talkers, and other people just sit in the back. So I was always kind of that person. And then I started wondering what I was missing with my patients. And that's actually when I first started coaching, probably about 10, 12 years ago, and became a wellness coach. And I went, wow, there's different ways to ask questions. So you actually can hear what someone's saying instead of making assumptions. And then when I became a leader through the pandemic, and I really did that because I felt things were missing in the system, and I faced my own set of struggles and thought, I'm going to change the world. And so I went into leadership, but then I couldn't solve problems. I thought, why am I having such a hard time solving problems? I'm a very smart person. I'm good at communication. So that's when I went back and did conflict negotiation and mediation training. I didn't want to be a mediator, but I just finished all the courses and they said, oh, you should do the exam. So I did it and passed it, and it changed my life. It's really helped me sit down with people and put process towards how we actually talk to each other and how we manage differences. A lot of people think, and I used to be this way, that you just sit around a table with people and you all just talk and you're going to solve a problem. You throw a bunch of ideas on the table. Oh, yeah, you're going to fix it. You're going to solve this problem. Here's the issue. Here's the solutions. And it doesn't really solve the problem. You actually have to sit down and think about the issues. And the biggest thing is, why do people care about the issues? And we miss that piece. So, what do people care about around the table? So true. And I keep saying to people, look, if you just learn how to talk to each other in neutral ways and you learn to develop those strategies, you will actually start to be able to solve problems with process and easily that you never thought were solvable.
There's something so valuable in what you just shared, and it's, the power of neutrality. It's definitely my personal philosophy of life. And, a lot of people find that a bit contradictory for someone that's all about emotion. But I think, understanding emotion and getting to this place where you're holding the reins of your emotion, they're not riding you anymore. You're riding them, so to speak. It's not that you don't have emotion or feel. It's that, you're able to balance those emotions out and actually be in again, open state, make effective decisions from a place of clarity rather than a constant kind of ups and downs that definitely arise in conflict. And I would argue probably life more broadly for most people living in the modern world. But it's a practice, right? I mean, there are whole spiritual philosophies dedicated to helping people achieve this beautiful place of equanimity, which can take decades and decades and decades. So from your experience and how you coach people who's maybe in a totally dysregulated state, getting them to this place of neutrality or equanimity, what's that journey like?
Well, we talked a little bit about this before, but I think this is totally fascinating. So I'm a very emotional person. I think emotions are great. There's a way to harness them and a way to use them to your advantage and to everyone's advantage in the room. And I sit down with people and I help them work through, what it is that you felt. And I call it the rant, but I think everyone needs to say what happened. Some people write a 12-page note about what happened and this happened and, whatever it is. But then you honor it. Like, this is what I felt. You can share how you felt. I mean, that is so valuable, to share emotions with people and just that neutral way. Not that they did something to you, but this is what I felt. And that impacts people a lot more than saying, well, I hated what you said. I want to say, I felt really hurt. And it's amazing how it changes things. So I think really honoring emotions, understanding them, and just what you're saying, and we were chatting about this, how can you regulate them? If I have people in a meeting, I have lots of physicians that'll be like, I can tell I'm starting to ramp up. I can feel I'm getting irritated. I can feel I'm getting angry. I'm not listening. And so we come up with strategies to look at, how do you know that's happening, so that you can regroup yourself and really focus on what you want to get done in the moment. So honor it, move on, actually look at your goal for the day, think about what you're achieving. You can go back and talk to whoever it was about how you felt, but how do you actually work with those two things together? And as you said, it takes practice. It takes knowing yourself very well, and it takes not judging yourself. I've had people start crying in a meeting, and I'm like, it's not a problem. Say, I'm really impacted by this. This is really important to me. And all of a sudden, people understand why that's there. And then you can move on. So, yeah, I think this is something that's really going to be majorly important in the future so that people can get past sort of what they've experienced and not get caught in the past and be honor what they're doing now and move forward. Really important stuff.
And it speaks to something so simple, right? That our emotions ultimately just want to be seen, they want to be acknowledged. And in the face of those things, they actually do downregulate. And I guess that speaks maybe to a broader cultural issue that I think perhaps exists in the West, which is potentially the level of emotional dysregulation is due to a society of people that feel unseen, that feel unacknowledged. And it's a heartbreaking thing. You know, all of us can relate to the feeling of not being appreciated, not being seen, not feeling heard. It's one of the most, I think it creates the most anguish a human can really experience when held in that state for long periods of time. Why is that? Why are so many of us feeling that in the world today?
I think our skills in hearing each other have faltered. I really do. I don't think we're that good at hearing someone's perspective. Someone says something and we're thinking about what we want to say. We're not really listening to what they're feeling. We don't have those in the moment skills to really embrace what people are going through and hearing people. And then I think that makes you feel unheard. I always use an example. I'm going to go into a patient's room. Let's say somebody's super angry or I don't want to name the emotion that let's say they're yelling. I've got a patient, the family's in there, they're yelling. I'm called to go see them. And when I was a younger doctor, I'd be like, can't do that. I care about you, but I'm not going to take the yelling. I'll come back when you don't yell. But sort of go through that. It's hospital policy, kind of shut them off. And now I'll go in there and say, I sense something really important's happening in here. And it's just amazing because they're like, what? I sense a really big emotion. What's happening? And they'll just be like, I'm angry, or they'll say whatever it is, or I'm sad, I'm whatever. And I'll say, that's it. I want to hear what you have to say. It changes the whole environment that I didn't tell them they were angry. I didn't tell them to stop. I said, I'm sensing you want to share something. I'm sensing it's super important. You tell me what it is. And I don't think we do enough of that. And we walk by someone and they give us what we think. I was just talking to a colleague because I get the sense that they'll give a facial expression when someone says something. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but everyone's probably interpreting that in a certain way. So how do we get past just interpreting some facial expression or some
Assumptions.
tone of voice? Right. So someone might have a louder tone of voice. Don't assume that they're angry or yelling at you. We hear a lot of things that people are getting yelled at work and they don't like it. And I say, well, what do you say to them? And they're like, nothing. I just turn around, go home. I think I'm going to quit. So, how do we empower people to say, oh, what's happening? I really want to do a good job today. So that a lot of people would say, oh, nothing's happening. Why? Did you get the impression something was happening? So, and this is what I find by coaching people on different sides of the coin is that most of the time the intent is actually positive. And people are not getting along well. Both parties or the teams, they usually all really want the best for each other. So some skills I think need to be had.
It's so true. One of the things I've done over the years is train facilitators. And a part of that is getting to a place of really deep presence. I believe the best facilitators are the ones that do all of the research, leading up to whatever they're facilitating and have all the PowerPoint slides, but they're the ones that can be alive, in the room and actually really respond to what's happening. And interestingly, it was that work that led me to really understand the impacts of things like trauma on the nervous system and how, some people, because of their experiences in the past, which have contributed to a sense of not being able to be present with really intense emotions, that they're going into some kind of, freeze or fawn or flight response in the face of something that is demanding, more emotional capacity to really be present with. Is this something that you see? And if so, how do you kind of guide people through those layers so that they can be stronger and more centered in their power in some of these more challenging conversations.
I really try to help people honor that trauma is a whole bunch of different things. And I have some people say to me, how can I say that I've been through trauma when I see what's happening in the world? Because my trauma isn't, maybe the highest level of trauma you could imagine. And I say, look, we've all been through trauma just with the pandemic. So what does it look like for you? And honor that and work through that and get help working through that and figure out how to deal with it and know that you've been through something. And whatever you've been through is important. And you don't have to, compare it to the person sitting next to you and feel bad if maybe it's not as bad as their trauma. Just we're calling it right now in Canada, and I don't know if this terminology is filtered around, but we in leadership world, we're calling it trauma-informed leadership. And that's really just kind of the same messaging that I'm saying is really think about the person next to you and where they come from, what their story is. Most of the time, even on our big, huge healthcare teams or our small healthcare teams, where we think we know each other, we don't know each other. Like we actually don't know what they've gone through. And maybe we haven't created the environment where they feel that they can share what they've gone through in their lives. But just to have some times where you can actually be with each other and have some of those sharing moments where you learn what they do outside of work or outside of the situation you're in is very important. I always use the analogy if you're driving and someone cuts you off, it's very easy to start swearing and gesturing and whatever the heck you want to do about that person. And then you turn and you realize it's someone you know. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, what's that person going through? Oh, I'm worried about them or I feel bad, or maybe you don't, maybe you're still swearing at them, but you do think it in a different way. If you know who they are, let's say their mom just died and they've cut you off, you will feel very differently than if it's someone you don't know anything about. So the more that we can learn about people and open ourselves to knowing each other, I think the better we'll get forward through this stuff. And the more accepting too, going back to the emotion, the more accepting of emotion we become.
I love that. I mean, it's again so simple, right? But really understanding how to meet someone in humanity, understand that we all have a humanity, even if we don't know the details of that story. Yeah, and it's easy to sort of, I think, become distracted in our own kind of medial problems day to day that we lose sight of how to really practice that empathy, even with strangers, or especially with strangers. So I'm curious, is this in any way a part of the way physicians are trained in school, in industry? Obviously, there's people like yourself that are bringing this message to them. But aside from those of you that have taken the initiative to really go and learn this, train and bring this into industry, is this a part of the way physicians are educated?
Well, things have changed a lot. So I'm reaching the end of my career. I started training 27 years ago. And I trained in the US and I trained in Canada. And at that time, no discussion about this stuff. We have so much technical information to learn, and it's getting more and more the more we know. So we're tactful. I've even tried to get some of these things in training agendas, and they're like, we have no weeks to give you. Now we're starting to do more of it. So I think it's really when people are finished medical school and finished residency training, which is kind of that next step before you become a fully qualified, whatever specialty or family practice you're going to do. We have more resources for people available to talk about these things. We're trying to train physicians that are already out there, leadership skills, conflict skills, a lot of this stuff. But from my perspective, we are so far behind the ball because we come out as really technical people. And my medical specialty, I do palliative care and general internal medicine. And that together, I do chronic illness care. And it's how do you see the patient through all of the lab tests and all of the imaging? And I still see it every day that we miss who that person is and what they need. And it might not be a test. And often it's not. So I think we're way behind on this sort of thing. I think the more of us that are starting to look towards this and teach about this and sit with teams and say, this is probably much more important. And we talk about AI. I think I can put up an X-ray and get artificial intelligence to diagnose what that thing is I see on there. We can, get robots to biopsy it. There are so many things that we can do, but this piece where we really pay attention to people, I think is going to be a little harder for AI to nail. They might get it eventually, but I think that piece is going to be probably more important to train people on than the technical pieces that I can look up on the internet. So I think we're behind is the long answer.
I mean, it's so confirming of what our team are working on. So in a way, it's not nice to hear, but it's also good to know that I do think that there are innovations and really scalable innovations that are, on the frontier of emotional intelligence, emotional health. That's what we kind of call it. And hopefully this will be sooner rather than later really integrated into the way the treatment experience is for consumers. What's your experience with the level of aptitude or resistance when you're teaching medical professionals around these concepts? Is it generally met with, wow, I needed this so much, this is so relieving to learn? Or is it like, we don't need this and this is a waste of time?
I think people want it. They want it. They want to understand other people. They spend a lot of time wasted on conflict and differences that they don't know how to work with. So I do think that people are smart and know that if they could do it better, they'd be more efficient. Life at work would probably be better. Problem is that it takes time. And in most professions, we're very busy.
Yeah.
And I just finished talking to a team. They're like, oh my gosh, how long is this going to take? To learn each other and to be able to rework things that have happened in the past for years and reframe how we think about things. Like, think about all this social media stuff, and we all of a sudden have to reframe. Maybe that's not true. And I should actually ask them why they thought or what they thought about that. And it's going to be a total culture shift. So I think people want it to happen. They're worried about the time that it's going to take out of their lives to do it. And I think also some people wonder if it really matters. A lot of people know that it matters, but I do think that there's still this part of society that feels that it's just action that matters. It's just getting result that matters, and how you get there doesn't matter. And that philosophy is still out there a little bit, quite a bit. And sometimes to be true, to be honest, if you get in a car accident and you go into the emergency room, you probably don't care if they ask you how you feel. They want to know what you want them to fix you, know what they're doing, and get it done. And so there are some professions where this is going to be more important and other professions where it's going to be less important. But I think to create highly functional teams, we just have to get there, and we will, but there's some resistance. There's no question.
Couldn't agree more. You mentioned earlier that really what led you to want to expand your understanding of this and pursue coaching on top of your existing career was you weren't able to solve problems effectively. What were the biggest kind of, maybe the top 3 things that you learned about mediation, negotiation, emotional intelligence that transformed your ability to solve problems?
Well, I think number 1 is just not making a list of potential solutions. That's important. I know physicians like to think that way, but it's why people care about the problem. So that's the first message. And spend some time figuring out why they care, and you will come up with a much better list of solutions, and you will come to the solutions together rather than apart. And so I really learned that a mediation exam, you fail automatically if you don't spend most of your time doing that. I think the second thing is that being able to talk is not the same as being able to really listen and to really support people coming up with their own ideas. And the coaching kind of does that. I used to think just listening was good enough. I'd sit there and listen and listen and listen and listen and think I was empathizing. And I even had someone say to me once, well, that's the same as empathy, what you do, isn't it? It's really not the same. But just being able to listen and say, yeah, I think I feel you is not the same as saying, what do you think the next step is? And those things, like how do we get through things, and actually having a process to help people walk through their next steps is very important. So it's just not about listening. I'd say that's the second thing. And, I think just having acceptance that differences are fantastic. I've come to this productive conflict. I used to pick everyone on my little group. If I had to create a board, I had to create a working group. It's like, who's not going to cause me problem? Who's smart? And so I bring all those people on the team. Now I think, who is the first one to question me? And they're on the team. Because I know it's great and it can be tough. Like you said, oh, they don't like my idea and maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was, but you are smart. It's just they had a different idea. So I think that's those big three things is going to really help people get to the next step. And if you don't know how to do those things, that's cool. Like most of us aren't trained to do that. But if you can start making tiny changes here or there, I always promote what, how, and tell me about questions. I always say, if you use those questions instead of closed questions that are yes or no, and you really listen and say, what about this? Tell me about this. How does that look for you? How did it feel when I asked you to do that? I think that people will be much more engaged than when we're shutting them off.
I love that. So actionable. I want to go a little bit deeper into one because it's really interesting. You know, people assume that if there's a problem on the table, everyone just wants a solution. But to really pause and be like, well, why is this problem important in the first place? When you stop there and you do some deeper inquiry, what tends to get unveiled? Is it what the person values, for instance? You know, what they assume or believe about a situation? And then how do you use what's ever unveiled to kind of support that conflict resolution process?
You know, the coolest thing is that it starts to unveil commonalities. When you really say to people, oh, what matters to you with respect to, watching this television show at this time or something, using something completely flippant. And it starts to come out, oh, I've got a family or I have to go do this. Or they'll bring up something about time constraints, or they'll bring up something about wanting to talk to people in certain ways. And I'll create this roadmap for people when they're going through issues. And we talk about the issues, why they care, and then the people who are involved and why they care. And it is fascinating as you start looking at stakeholders in a situation and why they care. You start copying and pasting. Oh, you all care about you have time for your family. You all care that your time is well spent. So it is fascinating. So there's some divisive things, but the majority of what people usually come up with are things that are togetherness. And all of a sudden, they start to feel for the other person and start wanting to make considerations when they're coming up with the final conclusion. And I think that's how mediation really works. And I call it facilitation because I find mediation seems like such a negative thing. But if we can facilitate these conversations so that we start to recognize that we're actually on the same page in a lot of things and we have a lot of common goals and a few goals that are going in different directions, we can get on the same page. So that was really a big revelation that can really help people solve problems.
I really like that. You know, I think one of the fastest ways to resolve conflict is to figure out where you agree, right? And I've also found the same thing in facilitation and also leading teams that when you strip it back, if there's two very polarized ideas on how to achieve something, if you do go that layer back, often both parties are wanting to feel safe or they're wanting to feel successful or they're wanting to, get it done in the best possible way, whatever it is. But yeah, I really echoed that actually underneath the how and the differences of the how often is a very universal landscape. And I think it's because there's an innate design to humans. We all kind of want similar things, even though we have different ways of going about that. We want to be loved, we want to be appreciated, heard, seen. And when those things are present, truly present, when we feel those things genuinely in our communities, whether that's our team or our family or a broader community, our ability to let go of these other points of conflict, I've definitely noticed, is so much greater than when we don't feel those things. We tend to kind of grasp onto these details of difference so much tighter to defend our position.
What are the other things? So that brought up, this is very interesting. So when you talk about a position, I talk about being positional. I try to get people to reframe. It's saying things like, it's going to rain tomorrow. Well, is it? Are there other options? Are there other things? So sometimes our ideas, we get so firmly rooted that our plan is the right one that we forget to look, is that really the only way that plan might actually map out? And so some people in the room will be like, oh, interesting, because with your solution, I thought it could potentially go this way. And they're like, huh? I never even thought about that. I assumed it would go this way and it would be great. But now I'm starting to think that my solution might actually look a different way. And I wouldn't think that was great. So this is where these different perceptions about what the solution you think is amazing could actually have some fracture lines. And that's where you can create something amazing. You break it up and then you put it back together. There's that Japanese art. I can't remember the name of what it is where you do that, but I love that idea that you fracture the whole concept that you believe, and then you start putting it back together and it creates something beautiful by doing that.
Right. And I think that's really valuable in that it brings to light, I think, some of these ideas we have relationally, which is if someone's hurt us, or I don't know, trust is broken, or there isn't good communication, well, it's beyond repair. And how many relationships, of any kind, like co-founders, team relationships, intimate relationships, friendships, family relationships, if we adopted this mindset of wholeness and, reconciliation and understanding, actually we would become more whole as people, because we're not needing to, cut people out of our lives as a result of not having the skills to handle disagreement. Of course, in some cases that's necessary and healthy, but I would say in many instances there is a path to reconciliation often, and it's just people don't have the skills to know how to action that.
It breaks my heart actually, because I always say there's a gold nugget. There's always something that the other person will recognize and go, oh my gosh, maybe we should talk. And I have that in my own life. I've had people that I cannot re-engage, and I know there is a solution that things can be better and worked through, but there's something that they just can't come to the table. And if you're in that spot, what is it that's stopping you from getting back to the table? And I really believe often it's fear,
Yeah.
what can happen, and am I going to get damaged in some way, but it takes a lot of vulnerability to say, well, I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to recognize that my opinion's not perfect. So I want to sit here and chat with you, but there's many people who are not getting there. And so how do we help people get there? I think it's just being able to let them talk to us and take whatever they need to say, and then say, hey, how can we rework it? And how can we reframe this? And I'm going to be here for you while you're going through this time, and come to me when you're ready to come to me, because I want to chat. I don't know how else to do it.
I just had such a surge of passion in this part of the conversation because, I've seen the pain that it causes people to have, open-ended conflict in their life that in one way or another, you can numb it, you can try to ignore it, you can be, stoic and not kind of let it affect your function day to day. But I think in the relationships that really matter to us, it's always going to be there. I've definitely experienced that in my own life as well. And one of the things I've noticed that I think has, accelerated my passion for this idea that we should be holding a space as much as possible for wholeness and healing is often there's a cultural reinforcement that it's better to just forget about it. I find that societally and culturally, it's often encouraged that if you're having a conflict with a loved one or with a team member, that your friends will rally around you and be like, oh, well, F them. Like, it's too much hard work. It shouldn't be this hard. And people opt and root for, to kind of just cut it off. And again, I think, in some instances that's valid, but how many instances is there a very deep learning and very deep healing could occur if both people came to the table, as you said. And by the way, for anyone that's resonating with this, coming to the table and working through the conflict doesn't guarantee or even mean that you're going to remain in each other's lives, but at least there'll be peace. At least there'll be a sense of, wow, I've learned what there was to learn in this relationship. And I've found that gives you such a better foundation to build relationships in the future.
I'm 100% with you. You can hear all that. Oh, it's hot water under the bridge. Oh, let it go. Get over it. You can go on and on with that stuff. But this stuff simmers. And I'm sure everyone listening has had something in their life that they've let go. And all of a sudden they wake up from a nightmare that has something to do with it. Or something in their life comes up and they're like, oh, I miss that person. Or, things like that does stay with you. And to have a discussion with that person or whatever it is, to even work through what happened, and not, as you say, you don't have to have some foregone outcome. You don't have to be best buddies, whatever, but to just hear each other's perspective and listen and accept their perspectives as their truth. that can be so freeing to allow yourself to accept somebody's perspective that is not the same as your own, even if you feel that values are highly divergent. Or, people say, well, our ethics are totally different. Hey, we're different people and that's okay. I want you to have a great life. And how do we get
Mm.
there?
Where does that come from? That position of this is just a fundamental difference, it's irreconcilable. We're never even going to be able to agree to disagree. From your experience, if you go that layer back and actually tap into someone's vulnerability, where is that usually actually coming from?
Geez, I don't know. This is a really tough question. I mean, this could be debated for 2 weeks or probably a year. We could debate where this comes from. I think we are so connected to things that mean something to us that help us live better lives. So if there's something in our life that creates peace for us, it is very hard to get around the fact that it might not be important to someone else. And
Mm.
I do think these
Yes.
neural networks that create truth for ourselves, I do really believe that we do this every day, or we feel this every day. We value this every day. It is so important to us. I always say, for my thing, it's kindness, like be kind. And then all of a sudden I see someone not being kind. I'm like, I don't like that.
Why would they not be kind?
Yeah,
Yeah.
how could they not be kind? Come on, be kind. I'm like, wait a second. Maybe it's not every second of the day important that everyone's kind. Like we have to
Mm.
understand and step back somehow. But I do think it stems from just this inability to see what's so important for our lives isn't necessarily important for the person next to us, their life, and accepting that we're not necessarily right. And we could name hundreds of examples across the world where this happens. And I'm always so devastated, as I say, watch the news. I'm always so devastated that we can get so deeply rooted in that our ideas are the only ideas that we can and get to these places. I don't know how we get through that, but I really do feel that the more of us that say, it's cool that we're different. I want you to be different from me. We can still be awesome friends and have quite divergent values.
Mm.
And, I can respect that. I do understand how people don't sit in that way, but I hope that the more people can start moving towards this, the happier our world will be.
Yeah. Do you believe, this is a big question, that in any circumstance, it is more optimal to choose principle over love?
Principle over love.
Yeah. So the standpoint, the rigid standpoint of there's a difference there and I love you, but this is just never going to be figured out.
No, I couldn't say that. No, I definitely wouldn't say that. Look, I think for every person, for every situation, this is going to be an integration of those concepts.
Yeah.
And you just have to decide in each moment, I'm all into mindfulness, that I don't try to spend hours thinking about what the next
It's
minute's going
about,
to be or what the last one was going to be, because what's the point? And
yeah.
there's lots of stuff out there about that. But we have to integrate those two things every day.
Yeah.
So,
Couldn't agree more.
and this is all about structure, even solving conflicts and problems. There's a structure, go ahead and do it. If someone can't get there and I just care about them so much, maybe I'm going to do something a little differently that moment, but then maybe I'll have to go back to the principles to really solve it. So I think it's a
Mm.
very fluid thing and that you have to figure out how to integrate those things for yourself and in the
Mm.
moment and for whoever else is involved. And isn't that what makes it so complex?
That's right. And I want to sort of emphasize this and highlight this, that as you learn about how to be with multiple concepts at once, or, even actual contradictions or paradoxes, this is actually one of the highest forms of intelligence. So the way that you evolve in your overall intelligence as a human to not need things to be so black and white, so linear, but be with the wholeness of complexity, your life, experience will simultaneously be so enhanced because you're able to receive more of life, be with more of life, and approach life in so much more of an intelligent way.
I think it's fascinating because we are talking about AI, which pieces will be easier for AI to do for us and which pieces will be harder for AI to do for us. And I think AI can look, I call AI, they can look
The
at,
AI.
yeah, exactly, can look at the complexities of it in the process. That seems pretty straightforward. I even think the emotions piece, but to the person, to actually know what's happening in your brain and how you see the other person's brain and how that this is going to be
The
very
nuance.
difficult. Yeah, that's going
Yeah.
to be very difficult. So I don't know how they take those complexities and work those things out for us. It will be fascinating.
Teaching the AI how to connect, because what you're, I think, alluding to, pointing out is that the specialness of a human's ability, or any sentient being's ability to connect, my ability to connect to you emotionally, intellectually, you know, energetically, and really notice the nuances that make you and respond in an empathetic, sensitive, understanding, compassionate, etc. way is a very it's a very sentient thing. Have a relationship with, an animal or even nature, arguably, there's a sentience to it. So the hurdle there for artificial intelligence is whether or not we can teach artificial intelligence how to actually, connect. And it begs, I think, an even bigger question is, what is the foundation required in order for connection to exist?
It's fascinating because I think
That's,
it brings it back to our conversation at the beginning of how did we get here? And even talking about the pandemic. And I really feel that one of the biggest things is that we have forgotten or we didn't know and we're living with it. Okay, we are coping with not really being great at connecting. But then we became extremely disconnected. And then the skill even got worse. And so, how now do we have those conversations in the moment where we can say, hey, what's happening? Or, oh, that hurt. I always do make a little tear. I'm like, oh, that hurt. And people are,
yeah.
oh, okay. So we're actually going to talk to each other in the moment. We're going to be here together. We're going to work through this together. Even if it takes some tears, even if I raise my voice, that's fine. Like it's
I'm
not
not
a
going to leave
bad
it.
thing.
I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to
Right.
stay
I'm
with
not
the
going to turn
process.
around
Yeah.
and say, you're done, you're done for me, or
This
I'm
is
quitting this
finished.
job.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm going to hang out because we're rowing in different directions, but I know that if we keep talking, we'll figure it out. And as I said before, it might not look like anything we could have imagined. Like,
Mm.
look at all the stuff that we figured out and the things that we can do as people. It might look very different, but it might be great. And how do we get there? So, really cool to bring it back to how do we actually talk to each other?
And how much stronger are our relationships going to be as a result of coming out the other side? I really feel this conversation is so important, and I feel so grateful that we got to have this conversation today. I already know that everyone listening has taken something really important away, and I would kind of even extend the challenge to anyone that is listening to actually have a think about, who are those people in your life? Are there bridges that you can acknowledge and then potentially start to build with people? Is there a depth of forgiveness that you actually have available to you in your heart that you're not expressing? What would that look like? And for all of us to play our individual role in creating a more unified society, I think is such an important message.
Yeah, I agree. What is our little piece? So, what is that little 15% that you can go to get that thing back or change the course of that thing, whatever it is that's taken too much time out of your life that it didn't need to? And you can spend time. I say this to physicians all the time. You can work through these things more productively and you'll get back to the job that you actually signed up for. And that's the same with life. Get through some of those things and you'll get back to your life and things you want to do and start having fun and feel more comfortable that you're not stuck in certain places. So we do have the power to do that within ourselves. And I do say the same thing. Try to think about where can you get your power back and go do it.
And that your power is in the love and the forgiveness, not in cutting someone out or trying to kind of band-aid a situation, but to actually really heal. It's possible. I think that message of hope really it's too rare. Even in self-development and coaching, there's a lot of obviously people that talk about healing, but really, how to heal the relationships you have with your loved ones and how to come into a place of true wholeness, and understanding. I do think the message is too rare. So thank you for your
Yeah. And I
work.
think it's power and vulnerability, right? It's that interesting word. We think power is one thing, but really it's being vulnerable and being able to move forward with that.
Open heart.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm very excited about the work that you're doing with helping people understand our emotions how they can be so productive. And this is the same with conflict, can be so productive, and our differences can be such a winning part of our life. And so the more people that can get to that point where say, I love this stuff, and I'm going to find out what that little conflict is going to give to me, because it always can give you something. So how do you get there?
Yes. Amanda, how can everyone learn more about your work?
Well, my website is amandabriseboismd.com. And so I've got some things on there, some little graphics that I've done, and you can sort of look at what I do with conflicts and teams and check that out. I've got some articles I've written and things. But the biggest thing, and I ask, if you have any questions or ever just want to chat or interested in this kind of work, get in touch. You can get in touch with me through there and say hi and let me know if you like what I'm doing or you have different opinions. I'm all for it. So reach out.
Love Out Louders, you heard it. And also I would ask you guys if there was something that you really got out of this conversation that shifted a paradigm for you, to let Amanda know too, because I think we don't do that enough.
Please do that. I'd really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you for listening, my friend. If you enjoyed the show, please let us know by leaving a review or sharing the episode with someone you love and expanding this conversation as far and wide as possible. If you're looking for a community to have conversations with about global affairs, please jump in our Telegram group or join our free think tanks. Thanks for being a part of the shift towards a love-based civilization. We'll see you in the Telegram group or in the next episode.